Rising, Leto sees the angel. Though there is no trace of Loken and Caecaltus, the corpse of the Emperor's angelic child still lies on the broken deck, dusted with powder and debris. Leto hurries to the body. It is laid out in a clumsy, disjointed sprawl, and the wounds upon it are appalling to see. Even so, Leto reaches down and gently touches the bloody throat. There is no pulse, no heat. Sanguinius is cold and gone. Indeed, he seems more than lifeless. The great angel, it seems, has suffered worse than a mortal death. Spirit and soul have been obliterated. There is a terrible sense of utter extinction, as though life has not just been ended, but was never there to begin with. Ever since the revelation that Sanguinius is indeed dead and truly gone from the 40k setting, myself and many others have been wondering to themselves, how will they bring him back? Well, I'm here to tell you, my friends, that I'm afraid he isn't coming back at all. Sanguinius is well and thoroughly gone. Now, you're probably shouting and jabbing your fingers at the screen saying, but Inquisitor Joshua, Games Workshop would never give up such a cash cow that is bringing back our Angel Boy and making all that green with a Sanguinius tabletop model. And I would say, you're right, they wouldn't. Not unless they thought they could sell 2 models. Welcome everyone to another video. This will be a big one, but be prepared for me to present all of my evidence first, as what I'm going to be talking about needs a lot of justification. Before we properly get started, I'd just like to ask that if you enjoy this channel and these videos, please give them a like. The YouTube algorithm is an untamed beast. Any gesture of support for the channel goes a long way, even for something so simple and quick as just a click of that like button for the video. There are other means to support the channel, of which I've linked down below and will go over briefly at the end of the video. So, without further ado, let us begin. In the excerpt I play out at the beginning of this video from The End and the Death Volume 3, we get a moment where the prototype Space Marine Leto is desperately trying to check the life signs of the fallen Primarch of the Blood Angels. It is during this attempt that, from Leto's point of view, Sanguinius' soul is completely gone. More than lifeless, spirit and soul have been obliterated. Utter extinction. And not just been ended, but was never there to begin with. These are some pretty compelling and final thoughts over the death of a demigod. And as far as we can guess from his character, this isn't something he would say or think on a whim. Though, to be truthful, the trauma and confusion of what Leto has been and is going through could easily be enough to place his mindset in such a dark, nihilistic space. In counterance to that observation from myself, Leto throughout the rest of the book also seems to pretty much have his shit together in what could only be argued as being in a very stressful work environment, leading me to think that during this moment of guarding Sanguinius' corpse, he could very well have been clear and sound-minded when checking the ragdolled angel for life signs, and, in this case, a soul. Now, what qualifies Leto to make this kind of "does their body have a soul" observation isn't clear, for he has shown no signs of psychic talent which would give him an immediate insight to the nature of someone's soul. He is, however, essentially a direct son of the Emperor and Erda, having their gene stock used in his creation as one of the first Space Marines, and so could very well be innately psychically gifted. I say all this, as my theory over here is pretty dependent on Leto being right about Sanguinius' soul being non-existent. To further hone this in, I'll mention this next moment where Leto once again is determining the life or death of a god. He climbs onto the edge of the throne seat to reach the 3rd star that's driven through the Emperor's shoulder. The great figure is bent forward, his head bowed. Blood strings from his split lips and his nose, and mats the long black hair that hangs like a curtain around his face. His left arm is shockingly stripped to the bone from the shoulder, the sleeve of flesh and crumpled armor bunched around his wrist. All life seems extinct, as absent as if it was the lifeless corpse of his angel son. The third pentacle is the only thing holding him upright in the blasphemous throne. Litu, his hands cut and bloody from his efforts, starts to draw the third star out. It will not move. This time, it feels important to note that Litu's observation here is, all life seems extinct, and directly comparing the seemingly dead Emperor to the very much dead Sanguinius. The wording Dan Abnett uses here feels very deliberate. This doesn't come across as a throwaway remark by Dan, it's there to drive home a point. Litu knows the difference. With that all out of the way, let us move on to part 2 of this theory. The very nature of the Primarchs, and the well-circulated theory that the Emperor used the knowledge he gained from Moloch during the Dark Age of technology in order to make his 20 demigod sons, and birth the Space Marine legions as they are now. According to this theory, the Emperor sought to create the ultimate warriors to lead his armies in the conquest of the galaxy. In his quest for dominance, he delved into forbidden knowledge and made a fateful bargain with the dark entities dwelling within the warp. This pact purportedly involved the infusion of fragments of warp entities into the genetic material used to forge the Primarchs, imbuing them with exceptional abilities and granting them a connection to the psychic energies of the Immaterium. These warp essences are theorized to have originated from lesser entities within the chaotic depths of the warp. Entities of considerable power, but still nowhere near that of the greater four gods of chaos. Something that can be further backed up by a few interactions. 3 specifically come to mind. The first is the well-known interaction between a transformed Corvus Corax and his traitor brother, Lorgar, in the short story Shadow of the Past, from the Sons of the Emperor anthology.
My Lord Aurelian, forgive my weakness. A creature of demonic spite has disrupted the great works here.
I see no demon. Kauta R glanced back towards his brothers. The entity that had pursued them had reached the top of the hill amid a storm of bolter fire. It cast aside legionaries with sweeps of glittering claws, leaving tattered remains draped across the stonework of the outer shrine. This is no demon. Lorgar raised his rod, beckoning to the blood-stained whirlwind tearing through the last of the Dark Apostles' warriors. Come to me, brother. With a last flurry of activity that turned another legionary to shreds of ceramite and ribbons of flesh, the apparition coalesced into a recognizable figure. It was of equal height to the demon Primarch, clad in black battleplate with long taloned gauntlets. A pair of wings stretched from its ornate backpack, fashioned as intricate metallic raven feathers. The face was as pale as snow, gaunt with eyes as dark as coal, framed by shoulder-length black hair. Kauta R felt his breath dying in his lungs as he looked up at the unmistakable features of Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard. A flurry of questions flooded his mind, but all remained unanswered as Corax spoke. What has happened to you, brother? I have ascended, said Lorgar. He indicated Corax with a twitch of his rod. I might ask the same of you. The Raven Lord strode forward, intent on Lorgar Aurelian. Kauta R and his warriors scattered before him, grateful to be free of his wrath. Marduk and his coterie closed around the Primarch, but a look sent them away. I am what I have always been, said Corax. I am vengeance incarnate. I am justice delivered. This place, beyond the veil, has revealed what we all are.
underneath the veneer of humanity our father crafted for us. We are of the warp. Have you come to make oath to the powers that are your new creator? No. I swore to destroy all Chaos Taint from the galaxy. You will be the first fallen brother to die beneath my blades. I am not the creature you fought on Istvan, said Lorgar, raising his mace. Nor am I.
Lorgar, a now demon prince, does not recognize Corax as a demon. Corax is, however, considerably stronger than his base Primarch form, and is aware that not only himself, but all the Primarchs are of the warp. Now, Corax has been missing since he started his one-man crusade into the warp to kill his traitor brothers. We don't know exactly when he left or when this short story takes place. What we can assume at this point is that Corax could have been running around the warp for thousands of years, and during this time become more aware of his connection to it. The Raven Guard Primarch goes as far to say, "This place beyond the veil has revealed what we are." He doesn't say he was transformed, or mutated, or forced into this state of his, just simply revealed. This isn't some unnatural transformation to Corax, just a revelation. One that he likely gained while travelling the warp, and maybe even had a chance to commune with this possible minor warp god that he has been bonded with. Enough so to accept their union. Which reminds me of the next example of this, and a major one in regards to this theory. The time that the Blood Angel's chief librarian, Mephiston, speaks to the Bloody Angel.
The Bloody Angel nodded. What do you see in the sky? I see two angels at war, one of gold and one of darkness. They have been at war forever, said the figure, even before your kind came to Baal. Those who dwelled here in distant epochs, they knew the angels of gold and black, though they did not see them as you see them. He gestured at a space between two of the outer pillars. An image appeared there, presenting Mephiston with a vision of spindly Xenos, heavily robed and bedecked in bloodstone, labouring to raise monuments long since ground to dust. And there, where millions of years later lived in brief paradise upon Baal Indicus and Baal Fortunata, the first men here knew the angels too, but refused to believe they existed, until times changed and they let the Black Angel in. Mephiston looked through the phantasmal angels. Both moons were present in the sky. Both were living. Baal Secundus sparkled with blue-green oceans. Baal Primus was drier, molten with biomes of soft greens and greys. Around Primus was a complex of orbital stations so extensive and radiant it resembled a necklace. The moons no longer bear those names, said Mephiston. Names come and go. Those names became corrupted in form. In time, they will be forgotten completely, as will your species. Another race, then another will come and uncover the things left behind in days long dead, and wonder what manner of hand shaped them.
During this conversation, the Bloody Angel explains to Mephiston how the twin angels of Baal have been in existence long before humanity came to know them, and that they have been worshipped for millions of years and seen as the angels of gold and black. The Bloody Angel then goes on to explain that for all the good the Blood Angels achieve, it feeds the power of the Golden Angel, and when a Blood Angel succumbs to the Black Rage and causes suffering, the Black Angel is strengthened. I'll be coming back to this conversation later, but for now I just wanted to focus on as to how all of this connects to the Primarchs having minor warp god souls. For later, the Bloody Angel reveals its identity with an image of Sanguinius, only to immediately state that Sanguinius is indeed dead. At this point, it has been pretty widely accepted that the Bloody Angel has a strong connection to Sanguinius. More likely than not, to have been the minor warp god that the Emperor created his angel son with. The Bloody Angel tells Mephiston that many species over millions of years have worshipped the golden and black angels. However, they did not see them as Mephiston does, for these likely take on the appearance of whatever being wants to perceive them as, expectedly changing to fit that race's appearance, culture, belief system, and whatever else may influence this. Their appearance is not set in stone. Of course, humans would see them as angels, and Mephiston would definitely perceive this godly angelic being as his gene father, Sanguinius. It might even keep the appearance of its last proper host due to Sanguinius being just that, its most recent vessel. Hell, it's probably just using this image knowing that Mephiston will respond positively from it. Alright, a final quick example of evidence to back up the Primarch warp soul theory. This one is a bit of a stretch, but it did give me pause when reading it, and I did genuinely stop a few seconds just to think it over.
Sanguinius beheld the beast. Eldritch ebon smoke coiled around a muscled torso of angry red flesh. The twitching chest and flexing arms barely contained by coils of brass links and battered bronze armor. Wicked black horns rose from an ever-snarling face that was the very expression of feral hatred, bared fangs yellow and dripping open to the air. The arrival had come like a comet, riding a plume of ash from the ruined sky above, and yet the Primarch instinctively sensed that it was a creature of the underworld rather than the heavens. He had seen the old books of lore that filled the secret libraries of his father's palace. He knew the myths of brutes and devils from the superstitious past of humankind. The humanoid that rose up before him was a dread of those long-dead men. More real and more terrible than they could ever have imagined. It spoke, leering at the angel.
"Have you enjoyed the match so far, Golden One?"
The voice was like bubbling magma.
"So many pieces spent, and yet so far to go before we reach the end game."
It cast a sly look at the dead ranged all around them, the bodies of legionary, cultist, and monster alike.
"But then, we both adore the taste of blood, do we not?"
"You speak as if you know me," growled the Primarch, "but I only see a monster to be killed."
"Recognize me then, Sanguinius of Baal."
It laughed.
"I am Kabunda, bloodthirster and general of Khorne. Blessed is his hate."
The creature gave a mocking bow.
"And we are brothers."
And we are brothers. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to claim this is literal, as that is a can of worms between the Emperor and the Chaos Gods that I have no interest in opening. What I claim here is that Kabunda recognizes in Sanguinius the minor warp god entity that is housed within the Primarch. That the brotherhood he speaks of is that of the Brotherhood of the Warp. That said, Kabunda does seem to have some kind of connection to the Black Rage, though that connection is never really brought up again, at least as far as I know. Now, this quote could really be anything. Kabunda taunting Sanguinius. He could have meant that they were brothers due to how much they love blood, or because Khorne has been quite clear about wanting Sanguinius as his own. But to keep things fun, I'm going to stick with the idea that Kabunda saw Sanguinius' connection to the warp through the minor warp god's soul residing within him, and thus taunted him with the subtle hint that they are more alike than he knows. Part 3 of this theory centers around the nature of these minor warp god entities, specifically evidence that they can inhabit 2 separate vessels. Now, I shouldn't really have to go into too much depth here, as the evidence is very apparent across the setting, specifically Alfarius and Omegon. with one soul and 2 bodies. Not only does the book Alfarius, head of the Hydra, mention this no less than 7 times, it also has the 3rd part of the book titled Part 3, One Soul, 2 Bodies. Of course, I wouldn't blame anyone for refuting all of this evidence, especially considering it all comes from the perspective of 2 Primarchs known for often speaking, as Matt Berry would put it,
"She speaks the bullshit."
But, all the same, I think we can accept this one as truth. Now, considering Sanguinius and his twin soul situation, the conversation between the Bloody Angel and Mephiston we saw earlier is enough evidence for me to move forward. I do, however, want to point out a couple of situations that make Sanguinius stand out among his brothers, particularly how characters in the setting can't help but like him. The reason I want to bring this up is based on the phenomenon of the Primarch aura. The Primarch aura is something that can be felt by those around them, more specifically their gene sons and even the gene sons of their brother Primarchs, though the strength of this effect is seemingly dependent on the Primarch. Even the average person can feel this aura, viewing Primarchs as demigods, feeling the compulsion to worship and prostrate themselves before them. So in addition to Sanguinius having 2 souls, it would make sense to think that each of his souls is as powerful as any of the other Primarch's singular soul. Essentially meaning Sanguinius could easily have been twice as powerful as each of his brothers. His physical prowess are easy to use as an example of this, as he is quite consistent in stomping his opponents, and it isn't until we see Sanguinius defeat Angron in his demon Primarch form, something that should be considerably stronger than a Primarch, that a difference is clear. Sanguinius even goes so far as to fight a base level Horus not long after this, and is still running rings around him, until of course Horus activates his chaos powers and ragdolls Sanguinius like the Hulk does Loki. Back to the Primarch aura. Is it possible that Sanguinius, having 2 minor warp god souls within him, he could also not only be twice as strong as the other Primarchs, but his Primarch aura would also be twice as strong enough to even compel people who should be resistant to his charms. In The End and the Death, we get a good example of this.
What use is his bravado? He can't provoke you. He can't goad you into becoming anything that you are not already. You lack nothing. The taunting just makes him seem juvenile, and you don't want to think of him that way. He's Sanguinius. You always loved him. You want to remember him as a paragon of virtue, not some... Except the bravado's not for you at all, is it? It's for him. You see it now. He's never had to act brave in his life. You've always thought of him as naturally brave, the bravest soul you have ever known. But it's not the case. When you're as powerful as Sanguinius, you're afraid of nothing. And bravery is easy. Everything he's ever faced, he's faced without fear. But he's having to act now, and he's not very good at it. He's never had to pretend his courage.
Horus, at the height of his betrayal during his fight against Sanguinius, still cannot help but state he loves his brother. Even as the Blood Angel Primarch is trying to anger him, even as Horus is on the very cusp of ending his brother's life, he still loves, respects, and even looks up to the angel. This quote is a 2 birds with 1 stone scenario, as we experience all of this from Horus's point of view, so his realization that Sanguinius is acting brave, as for the first time ever, he is afraid. Horus acknowledges that Sanguinius was so powerful that he never had to pretend he was courageous. Next up, Constantine Valdor.
Dawn knows there is old rancor there. There always has been. Constantine, with his eternal saturnine disposition, had never even tried to disguise his feelings towards the Primarch's sons and their Astartes' offspring. It's not jealousy or even resentment, it's doubt, a grave uncertainty, a wary lack of faith in the new instruments that had been fashioned to supplant his kind. He was, Valdor begins. Dawn stops and looks back at him. I had time for him, says Valdor. For Sanguinius. He was... I could not help but like him, Rogel, though I tried my best not to. He looks at Dawn and manages a grim half smile, as I do with most of your lot. Dawn nods. A fine requiem from you.
Valdor has made it clear that he isn't the biggest fan of the Primarchs, and as Dawn acknowledges, his doubts aren't in any terms unfounded. Yet, here he is, notably one of the most powerful and influential characters within the 40k setting, and after learning of Sanguinius' death, he tells Dawn that he liked the fallen angel. He actively did not want to like any of them, but for all he tried, he just couldn't help it. And lastly, the Silent King. It is curious that humans choose to know of their past and what remains unremembered. They do not heed the lessons that they have already learned, because they often elect to forget them. Perhaps, had he not fallen to a logical and prideful infighting, their Sanguinius angel might have steered them toward a more enlightened destiny. Certainly, he would have made a more amenable emperor than a perverse witch corpse. If ever there was a human to be mourned, noble Zarek would say that it was him. That alliance, the first alliance perhaps, might have ended the threat of the Devourer before it ever surfaced. At least, the Tyranids might never have been drawn to this galaxy in the first instance. Now, I get it. Many will argue that the Necrons in this short story will basically say anything in order to manipulate Dante and the Blood Angels. The Necron narrator even point-blank states that they are manipulating the Blood Angels. However, this quote from the short story isn't said to the Blood Angels. It's a Necron speaking to another Necron. What is being said about Sanguinius here is genuine. Even if the Necrons are lying about a minor 10,000-year-old alliance between Sanguinius and the Silent King, the two did still meet. The narrator, a Necron, even if second-hand, is still giving its opinion on the Blood Angels Primarch. And once again, I am led to speculate that the reason Sanguinius was able to impress even the Silent King could be down to the idea that his Primarch aura is possibly twice as powerful compared to his brothers, due to his inhabiting of two minor warp god souls. Now, in part 4 is where I really start to bring this theory together. I mentioned earlier that I would come back to the conversation between the Bloody Angel and Mephiston, specifically the confirmation of the current avatars of the Golden and Black Angels.
You know the Golden Angel. Mephiston nodded. He is the Sanguinor. He was once a man like you. Into him was poured all the nobility of your kin for 100 centuries. See how powerful he is. Then Mephiston frowned. Then who was the Black Angel? No one. The rage roams free throughout the warp, said the Bloody Angel. It has no anchor. As time has passed and your bloodline degenerated, it has grown stronger and stronger until now. With the Great Rift open, it becomes the mightiest it has ever been, and the Sanguinor is no longer enough to balance it. It cannot be stopped by any but you. Am I?
Mephiston looked swiftly to the bloody angel.
Am I it?
The bloody angel stared at him.
I should never have survived Armageddon. What if I were to die? Would that stop it?
No, you and it are joined, but you are not one.
Then what is this choice?
The Black Angel needs an avatar to match the angel in gold. Take the essence of the rage into yourself. Ground it in reality. Become its prison. If you accept a second rebirth, you'll become the living manifestation of the chapter's darkness. All will fear you. All will hate you. The role will consume you, and your soul will be damned. But your bloodline will be safe for a time. Here we have some pretty hard evidence, well, outright statements that the Golden Angel is hosted by the Sanguinor, and the Black Angel is, after this chapter, now hosted by Mephiston. What we know of the Sanguinor is simple. During the Horus Heresy, in the midst of Imperium Secundus, Sanguinius had been declared emperor, and the head of the Sanguinary Guard, Ascalon, wished to create a stand-in Sanguinius in the event that he was targeted. This decision came to completion when the Sanguinary Guards, Alatron and Haratail, were chosen by chance from a group of 10 by drawing straws, followed by their names being pulled from a grail once the other 8 guards were no longer present, resulting in Alatron being chosen. Ascalon then killed Haratail in order to keep the identity of the Sanguinor a secret. From this point on, Alatron would no longer exist. It wasn't until Sanguinius was trapped within the warp while battling the demon Medael that the Sanguinor truly became what it is today. Taking Sanguinius' place within the crumbling portal, the Sanguinor sacrificed himself for the good of his father and brothers. In his final moments, he was seen to form into a golden angel, an angel that we now know represents the light side of the Blood Angels. And though the Sanguinor has been reported to appear during some of the Blood Angels' most desperate times, assisting with impossible tasks and cutting through hordes of demons like they were nothing, there is a contrast with Mephiston I can't help but notice. The Sanguinor doesn't have an avatar. At least, not in the same way Mephiston is the avatar of the Black Angel. Alatron, as we know him, is dead, his body likely torn apart and dissolved within the warp. And though Sanguinius sees for himself the Sanguinor transforming into the Golden Angel, we never get to see him in the same way we see Mephiston, a host that has their own goals and desires. I personally see a big difference between the two. One is the minor warp god, the other only hosts one. I believe that the future host of the Sanguinor is Chapter Master Dante. I'm certain for many this theory is an old one, and I would like to state here that I had no idea about this theory when I first read this stuff. Yet, it seems like overly overt foreshadowing. To pick up on this theory on a first-time read hints that this isn't something Games Workshop is trying to hide. They seem totally fine with telegraphing it so openly. It was only until I was refreshing myself on the books for this video that I started to see that I wasn't alone in thinking this as I read the books for the first time. It's probably been said so many times that I don't need to go over it, but I technically already have, and it is important to fit into my overall grand theory. The hunger came from my father. The puppets of the dark gods clashed with the hunger for the pleasure of killing him. There was a warrior in gold before the throne, surrounded by my father's custodians and other heroes who, mighty though they were, paled next to the lords of our days. There they fought, and there they died, The vision ended as the devourer of flesh and the devourers of souls closed in on my Lord and Creator. There was despair only, despair and more despair, but before I woke, something more. I sensed stirring in the wall, and the touch of my father, his mind made anew, and the knowledge that all might be well. As I am fated to, so too did this golden warrior lay down his life to protect my father. The precious seconds he brought with his blood could change everything, or they could change nothing. Maybe the vision is false. I pray the future is mutable, and so it has proven in the past. All but the moment that draws near, the reckoning when I must face my brother. That I cannot avoid. I do not know who this golden warrior was. He appeared similar to my herald, and I saw my own face depicted upon his mask. But he was not me, and he wore a form of armor I do not know. It is certain that he was one of my sons, and whether his sacrifice will prove to be in vain or not, I know this, that he was a noble warrior, true and purer than any of his age, and I love him for that, for it means that my works for the Emperor, at least, have not been undertaken in vain, and that my unavoidable death might also prove fruitful. The entry ended. The commander sat back in his chair, the ancient rosewood creaking with the shift in his weight. He did not recall the first time he had the notion that the warrior was him. Others assumed it was the Sanguinor, but Dante was convinced it was not. He had dismissed his thoughts as vainglory and sought penance. His discomfort at casting himself as the great savior grew every time he read the scroll. The compulsion to read it only grew in tandem with his conviction that Sanguinius had been describing he, Dante, 9,000 years before he had been born.
Dante and the Sanguinor are evidently linked, or in the future, shall be. Dante matches up very well with Sanguinius stating in his vision how the Golden Warrior was similar to his herald. Not the same, but similar. He also mentions that he does not recognize the armor the Golden Warrior wears, which would make sense, seeing how the armor Dante would be wearing will be a good 10,000 years updated compared to what Sanguinius would know. Other Blood Angels believe that this Golden Warrior is the Sanguinor, but Dante is convinced he is the Golden Warrior in Sanguinius's prophecy. And, as much as Dante tries to remain humble by trying to dismiss these thoughts and notions of grandeur and heroics, he is consistently compelled and drawn to this idea that he will follow in his father's footsteps and lay his life down for the Emperor. And if we know one thing about prophecy and fate within the 40k universe, it's that belief in it often leads to that future becoming reality. Something that Sanguinius and Conrad Kurz know all too well. The connection between Dante and his gene father here is palpable. If what we have talked about so far is true, then Dante would be the perfect host for the minor warp god entity that once aided Sanguinius. These connections don't stop there. Dante's interaction with the Sanguinor are many, and to put this into perspective, most Blood Angels still think the Sanguinor is just a myth told to boost the morale amongst the Brotherhood. For the 10,000 years of its existence, it has barely made itself known, enough to be considered a myth. And now, it is appearing before Dante constantly, like it's checking in on the new body it's just commissioned. Speaking of new, with Dante being over 1,600 years old, he has been around significantly longer than any single Space Marine. And with the Sanguinor constantly popping in to fist bump his friend on special occasions, I can't help but feel that maybe the Golden Angel is playing a part in extending this old warrior's life. One single event really stands out to show how special Dante is to the Sanguinor. and that is when the Herald, for the first time in recorded history, spoke. And of course, the person it speaks to is Dante.
There are no words. The Sanguinor was ever silent. Dante dropped his voice to a whisper. Is there hope? Can Bal be saved? Dante expected no reply. There was not a single record of the Sanguinor ever speaking. The presence of the Sanguinor seemed to swell and fill his vision with its purity and its light. Ferocious in battle, a great peace surrounded it now, and it settled on Dante like a blessing. There is yet hope, the Sanguinor said. With a rush of air, it vanished. Amazed, voices rose up all over the hangar. It spoke. The Sanguinor spoke. Voices called.
Everyone in 40k seems to treat Dante as if he is special. He gets to see and do things that barely anyone else would ever have the chance. Older than any Space Marine before him, frequently comes into contact with the Sanguinor, has spoken with the Silent King. He has respect from and has fought alongside both Rabute Guilliman and Lionel Johnson, the two brother Primarchs who I would argue were closest to Sanguinius in kinship than any of the others. I mean, hell, Guilliman even goes so far as to call Dante his equal upon their first meeting.
Now he understood the significance of the sword missing from his vision. The sword of the Emperor was there before him, upon the person of a living Primarch. Rabute Guilliman had come to Bal. There was no mistaking it. Dante had seen the Primarch before, shut away in a stasis field in the fortress of Hera on Macragge, where he had sat a second from death for most of the Imperium's history. But here he was, alive and breathing. The Primarch's physical presence hit Dante hard. Guilliman was nobility writ large, a monument in flesh. He was overwhelming. Ignoring the hurts of his healing wounds, Dante fell to his knees with a clatter and dropped his head. Can it really be true? Is it really you? Do you live? The Primarch stood and set his sword aside and came down the steps. Get up, Dante, said Guilliman gently. I will not accept displays of humility from a man like you. You are one of the few in this era who have earned the right to speak with me on equal terms. Rise, now. Dante grunted with a pain as he attempted to get to his feet. Guilliman grasped Dante's pauldrons and bodily hauled the chapter master up. Forgive the indignity, Guilliman said. I see you are hurt. Dante nodded numbly. Never kneel before me again. I will have you stand with me as a mark of respect. I will order you not to, if I must. I would rather our relationship not function on those terms. I have no time for deference. There is too much to do. Though, if your pains are great, you may of course sit, he said with the ghost of a smile.
I don't really think I needed to include that quote. I did, however, decide to use it as I genuinely enjoy how wholesome this moment is. In addition, Sandman of Terror loves to mention how Guilliman is actually pretty funny. And he's not wrong. It's slight, but Guilliman's sense of humour fits so perfectly with the 40k setting. The last specific I want to go over for Dante is from the end of the devastation of Bal. We all know what I'm going to say. When the Sanguinor and the supposed Sanguinius saved Dante from death after his fight with the Swarm Lord. This, funnily enough, happens moments after Dante finally gets closure of realizing he is not the Golden Angel.
The Sanguinor had come to him at the end of his service. You came, he said. His voice was dry, his lips numb. The beautiful voice that had inspired millions was a harsh whisper.
You came after all.
The Sanguinor kept its silence, but stood back and flung an arm wide to indicate a greater presence behind it. Dante's breath caught in his chest. Once again, he saw the face of Sanguinius, but this was no metal representation. The face was of flesh. The wings that spread either side of his body were white feathers, not cold sculptures. His body was as real as his sorrow. He shone like a desert sun in the full glory of noon, a bringer of light, dangerous in its incandescent power. "My son," Sanguinius said. "My greatest son." The Primarch reached out to him. Dante was on his back, but at the same time, it was as if he floated in an immense void, and Sanguinius hovered in front of him. And yet, when the Primarch cried, his tears fell forward onto Dante's face. All reality's order was disturbed, and this felt like no dream or vision. When Sanguinius's glowing fingers traced the line of Dante's cheek, they were solid and warm, and they brought into him a sense of peace and holy joy. "You have suffered greatly for mankind's sake," said Sanguinius. His voice was beautiful. "You have won your rest 1,000 times. Rarely has one man given so much. Louis of Bal Secundus. You have been a light in dark times. I would give you any reward. I would take you to my side. I would free you from this strife. I would release you from this pain." "Yes," said Dante. "Please. I have served so long. Grant me the freedom of death." Sanguinius gave Dante a look of profound sorrow. "I cannot. I regret that I can do none of those things. I need you, Dante. Your suffering is not done." Sanguinius gripped Dante's face in both hands. Strength flowed from the Primarch, driving out death's comfort and replacing it with pain. The scene rippled. He heard the shouts of space marines, felt the ghastly touch of living hands upon his armor. Sanguinius faded. "Please, no!" Dante cried out. "My lord, I have done enough. Please, let me rest." The light was dying. Sanguinius's smile carried with it the sorrow of 10,000 years. Darkness was returning. The great angel disappeared into it, but his glorious voice lingered a moment. "I am sorry, my son, that you cannot rest. Not yet. Live, my son, live." Dante returned to life, screaming for the mercy of death. Dante returned to life, screaming for the mercy of death. Wow. That line just drips with the elegance of grimdark. Obviously, I don't believe this is really Sanguinius come to save Dante. Sanguinius, as we know, is long dead. This is more likely another form of the twin angels of Bal, the Bloody Angel, or whatever these minor warp gods are. And at no point does it claim to be Sanguinius, and if anything, doesn't break this news to Dante purely because it can see the peace of mind it brings the dying chapter master. This man, so eager for the release of death, probably takes the news of him having to fight on better if it's coming from what he perceives as his father. Okay, so with the reason for why I believe Dante will become the Golden Angel out of the way, I should really go over Mephiston a bit, considering how he is the other half of the whole thing. Mephiston gets a lot of shit for being a Mary Sue, and I think this is more about his character than his actual power level. He is often criticised by fans for his protagonist syndrome and insanely thick plot armour,
Well, unfortunately, my friends, Mephiston is a protagonist. He is going to have plot armor, and his role in the story is far from over. In a setting where some of the big movers have god levels of power, people rarely seem to bat an eye. Honestly, half of the appeal of the 40k universe for many is that its power scaling is absurd. It goes way beyond anything out there in terms of scale and grandeur, at least anything else I'm aware of. And I definitely would consider myself a thoroughbred nerd for this kind of stuff. And Mephiston over here is probably one of the most explained characters in regard to why they are so strong. If we can fully acknowledge that Mephiston as the host of the Black Angel is very likely also hosting one of the minor warp god entities that Sanguinius himself was the vessel for, then the idea of him being this powerful isn't really a stretch, is it? Hell, if he wasn't this powerful after everything we know about him, I'm sure people would find a way to hate that too. It's okay not to like his character, but his level of power does make sense. If what I'm saying in this video is right, Mephiston is at very least Primarch level, with his only limitations being his lack of experience with this power, and maybe even his lack of understanding with how far he can go with it. This also doesn't break anything in terms of balancing the factions within the settings. The 40k galaxy is ridiculous. Primarchs are special, yes, but that doesn't guarantee they'll be steamrolling every enemy of mankind with no issue. I mean, just ask Ferrus Manus how being a Primarch worked out for him. Of course you can't, he's dead. Or the leader of the Legion of the Damned, take your pick. Mephiston's place in the power hierarchy of the 40k setting is not out of place. It is exactly where it should be. Right, here we are, the finale. One of the biggest questions in the community right now is which Primarch is coming back next, as we all seem to have accepted that Primarchs returning aren't a question of if, but when. My thoughts on the matter are this. Games Workshop have, in their most recent writings on Sanguinius, proclaimed him as dead, gone, obliterated, non-existent, forever and always not of this world. Well, assuming we can take Litu's word for it. So, bringing him back, though certainly a monetary benefit, is probably not in their current plans. However, the stage is set for Primarch returns, and to leave out the Blood Angels is a harsh way to alienate the 9th Legion fanbase. The solution to this would be, as I'm sure you would have guessed by now, assuming you've come this far in the video, is that Dante will become the vessel for the Golden Angel, with Mephiston continuing as the vessel for the Black Angel. Two sons of Sanguinius, each with a minor warp god soul within them, both individually as powerful as a Primarch, and both perfectly representing the dichotomy of the Blood Angel's Legion being elevated to the title of Primarchs. And, seeing how Astartes all commonly refer to each other as brother, a unified title held between the two wouldn't be amiss. Something to the effect of the twin Primarchs of the Blood Angels. Which does have a nice ring to it if I do say so myself. While also not being such a foreign concept, both to those in the 40k universe who are aware of Alpharis and Omegon, and to the fans. Now, I would imagine that if Games Workshop does go ahead with this and they really wanted to enforce the official nature of this, it would have to be done within the law. And I don't think any of us would really accept this outcome if not for the Emperor himself bestowing the title. The Lion has yet to go speak with his father. He hasn't even spoken to Guilliman yet. He has, however, met Dante, and very much acknowledged his authority and right to lead the Blood Angels. Perhaps, over the years, as the story progresses, Dante will embody the Golden Angel. Both Guilliman and the Lion will recognize the minor warp god's soul now within him for what it truly is, especially as by this point they are both more aware of their own personal connections to the warp themselves. Dante, considerably more informed about the history and nature of the Blood Angels, will inform the Primarch brothers of Mephiston and his connection to the Black Angel. The Lion could even use his forest walking ability and speak to the old king on the river, which, as we are told, can only speak if asked the right questions. I imagine the Lion will try ask questions of a complex nature, something like, what are the angels of gold and black, or can we bring back Sanguinius? Only for the old king on the river to stay silent. After a few more failed attempts, the Lion will simply ask, can we come home? And the Emperor will reply, yes. With this new information at hand, a brief phone call and invite from Daddy, the four will embark on a much needed galactic road trip back to Terra. And here, by whichever means, the Emperor will communicate to his sons and their gene sons the very nature of their souls, of their potential should they be able to unlock it, and then proceed to elevate Dante and Mephiston into the twin Primarchs of the Blood Angels. There you go, Games Workshop. This is how you bring back a new Primarch without things getting stale, while also being able to sell two brand new Dante and Mephiston models. For the sake of keeping things from being weird, I'd expect them not to make them Primarch size, both in the setting and tabletop. It would add to their unique nature of being Astartes-born Primarchs, and also enforce the idea that their power isn't based on physicality or the material realm, but through their warp souls compounding on their experience and leadership abilities. Of course, they can still be absolutely physically gifted wrecking balls when it comes to combat, but that isn't really what makes a Primarch unique.
For, after all, in the grim darkness of the far future, it's what inside that counts.
That doesn't sound right. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching this video. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, click that bell button if you want to be notified of any future videos, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so on Patreon for just £1 a month, or click that join button down below to support on YouTube for just 99p a month. Did you like this theory? Did you hate it? Is there anything you'd like to add or think that I missed? Who do you think the next Primarch to return will be? How do you think they'll come back? Let me know in the comment section down below.
Let's feed the algorithm gods.
Thanks again for watching, my friends, and ta for now.